My daughter-in-law laughed as she said, "Just dump all 9 kids on her. She doesn't do anything anyway." I froze behind the hallway wall, the grocery bags cutting into my wrist, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. That night, instead of confronting her, I took out the catering receipt and began my own quiet plan, a ledger that would change everything before Christmas Eve. They thought I'd stay quiet forever, but this story was only getting started. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It was a Tuesday evening, a week before Christmas, when I pulled into Lyle and Carol's driveway with 2 grocery bags resting on the passenger seat. The porch light flickered like it always did in winter, half burnt but familiar. I carried everything up the steps: roast seasoning, cranberries, extra butter, things Kirill always forgot but never asked for. I suppose that was my quiet way of being useful without invitation. Through the window, I saw flashes of the living room's warmth, garland lights, a Christmas movie humming, the muffled laughter of children I helped raise. My heart softened. These visits were my rhythm, even if no one noticed. The door creaked when I turned the knob. "It's just me," I called softly, like I had 100 times before. I set the grocery bags on the counter, rearranging the sugar canister out of habit. That's when I heard her voice. "Just dump all 9 kids on her," Carol said. Her tone clipped, careless. "She doesn't do anything anyway." Then came Lyle's laugh, soft, tired, like he wanted to disagree but didn't. That laugh cut deeper than words. My breath caught. My hand went numb around the grocery handle, the thin plastic biting into my wrist. I stood there between the kitchen and the hallway, surrounded by Christmas lights that suddenly looked too bright. They didn't see me. Maybe they wouldn't have cared if they had. My pulse thudded against the silence. I could have stepped forward, said something sharp, made them face what they'd just done, but all I did was stand still. Stillness was my only armor. I backed away, quiet as falling snow. Out the side door, my shoes scuffed against the frozen grass. By the time I reached the car, my throat burned with a heaviness I couldn't name. I sat behind the wheel without turning the key. From where I parked, I could see their living room window glowing gold, laughter spilling into the dark. I pressed my palm against the cold steering wheel, steadying my breath. This wasn't new. I realized it was just the clearest version yet. Every sigh, every ignored text, every "we'll handle it while Tia Mom" had been leading here, to this echo I wasn't meant to hear. My reflection in the car window shimmered with the house's light, blurred like tears. I told myself not to cry. Not yet. At home. The silence met me like an old friend. I set the grocery bags on the counter and slid a folded receipt from my purse. $963.75, the catering order for Christmas Eve dinner. I'd paid it last week, thinking it would ease the burden on them. Now, it felt like the price tag of my own foolishness. I smoothed the paper flat with my hand and stared at the ink until the numbers seemed to sink into the countertop. This was proof, I thought. Not of the money, but of everything unspoken. Proof that kindness had turned into expectation. Proof that I'd been footing the bill for my own erasure. I pulled out a small spiral notebook from the drawer, the kind I used to track client payments when I was still working as an accountant. On the first page, I wrote 2 columns, given and received. Under given, I wrote the date and the amount. Under received, I left the space blank. I sat there for a long time, staring at that blank space. The hum of the refrigerator filled the room, the only sound in the house besides my own breathing. Through the window, the neighborhood Christmas lights blinked in rhythm, oblivious. When the clock on the stove clicked past midnight, I closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet, "Something will change this year." On my calendar, the square for December 24th was circled in red ink. I traced it with my finger and smiled, not the kind of smile you give out of joy, but the kind that seals a promise. They would learn soon enough who had really been keeping this family standing. Sunday morning light spilled across Plano like a quiet apology. I drove slowly toward the church, the car heater humming low, my hands still stiff from sleep. The roads were nearly empty, just a few cars with wreaths tied to their grills, ribbons fluttering in the cold. I told myself that I was fine, that it was just another Sunday, another routine. Habit was easier than emotion. The church looked the same as always: red brick, white steeple, children practicing carols on the steps. I parked near the side lot and carried my donation envelope toward the entrance. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls clung to the air. "Good morning, Helle," the greeter said, handing me the weekly bulletin. I smiled, polite and small, the way people do when they're trying to pass as unbroken. For a moment, I almost convinced myself the ache from the night before was gone. The Christmas music, the chatter, the smell of pine, it all built a gentle cover over what I'd heard in my son's house. I wanted to believe in this normalcy, to melt into the crowd of cheerful churchgoers who had no idea that one of them was slowly learning what it meant to disappear. As I walked down the hallway toward the fellowship room, something new caught my eye. The bulletin board, usually filled with charity flyers, was now covered with glossy photographs. A bright banner above it read, "Families of our parish." I leaned in to look. Smiling couples, children in matching sweaters, dogs with Santa hats. Then I saw it. The Mercers. My son's family. Kirill had chosen a formal portrait this year, matching red and gold outfits. The children arranged perfectly around her. Lyle stood slightly behind, one hand on her shoulder. 9 children, all beaming. The caption underneath read, "Merry Christmas from the Mercer family." My name wasn't there. Even worse. Below the photos was a sponsor list printed neatly on gold cardstock. Gold donors. The Mercer family. I blinked. Once, twice. Like it might correct itself. I'd written the check for that donation. My handwriting was still on the copy I kept at home. A woman beside me pointed at the photo, smiling. "Such a big, beautiful family," she said warmly. "How lucky they are." "Yes," I managed. "They're very lucky." The words came out smooth, but they left a sting behind. I left the hallway without another glance. The sound of the choir warming up in the sanctuary trailed behind me like a song I used to love. Across the street, a small coffee shop was open, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. I crossed carefully, holding my coat tighter. I ordered a decaf and sat by the window. The foam swirled and broke apart slowly as I stirred it. Around me, people talked about shopping lists, recipes, travel plans. I heard laughter and thought of how many times I'd volunteered for bake sales, silent auctions, church drives, always writing checks under the Mercer family because it sounded stronger that way. I remembered how Carol once said, "It looks better unified, Mom." I'd agreed, wanting to believe I was still part of the unit. But now, looking at that photograph, I understood. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. I took a sip of coffee and let the bitterness settle in. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, heavier. The recognition that I'd allowed this to happen piece by piece, signature by signature. When I finally left the cafe, Mrs. Vale, Carol's mother, was stepping out of her car near the sidewalk. Her fur-lined coat brushed against mine as she greeted me. "Oh, hell! Did you see the photo at church? Carol did everything herself this year. The design, the printing, the sponsor list. She's just incredible, isn't she?" My jaw tightened, but I smiled anyway. "She's very thorough," I said, my voice even. "Mrs." Vale laughed, oblivious. "That girl never stops." She waved and hurried off, leaving the faint smell of perfume in the cold air. I walked to my car. The windshield was speckled with drizzle, tiny mirrors catching the pale light. I sat behind the wheel, listening to the faint echo of the church bells. Each chime felt like a small farewell to something I once believed was solid. As the wipers swept across the glass, the blurred view cleared. The parking lot, the church, the town I'd lived in for 30 years. Everything was still there, but I felt newly awake. I reached into my purse and pulled out my small ledger, tracing the red circle around deck 24. No more silent funding of my own invisibility. I turned the key, the engine humming like resolve. By Tuesday morning, the family group chat buzzed with a message I never agreed to. My name assigned to babysit 9 kids again. Morning sunlight filled my kitchen, pale and cold against the stainless steel sink. I poured myself a cup of coffee, waiting for the warmth to reach my fingers. The quiet was fragile, the kind that makes you feel like the world might leave you alone for a while. Then came the sound that broke it. Ping, ping, ping. I glanced at my phone. The family group chat. Mercer Christmas plans. My name always tagged but never spoken to. I scrolled through the new messages, half expecting a recipe or a photo of the kids in matching pajamas. Instead, I saw Carol's message. "Mom will watch all 9 kids from 4 to 10 p.m. Thanks, Mom," a thumbs up from Lyle. Heart emojis from the daughters-in-law. Smiley faces from the grandkids. No one had asked. Not a single question mark. Just an announcement written like a law. For a moment, I thought I'd missed a conversation. Maybe there'd been a call, or a text I forgot to answer. I searched the thread, scrolling up through digital noise. Nothing. The same silence as always, wrapped in cheerful punctuation. I typed slowly. I don't remember agreeing to that. 3 dots appeared. Someone's typing. Then they disappeared. A second later, all the tiny profile icons at the bottom of my message turned blue. Read by everyone, but no one replied. Even silence has a sound. It hums louder than any insult. I set the phone down and stared at the coffee rippling in my cup. The world had gone back to normal. Except it hadn't. My hands trembled slightly as I wiped the counter. I told myself not to take it personally, but the words landed like stones. It wasn't just this one moment. The quiet had been building for years. Last Christmas, I'd watched all 9 of them while the adults toasted champagne in the living room. I'd heard Carol's voice drift from the hallway. "Mom likes to feel useful." As if being useful was the only reason I existed. I'd stayed up late wrapping gifts that said, "From the Mercer family." Cooked a meal I never sat down to finish, and took photos I wasn't in. They said thank you the way people thank the cleaning crew on their way out. Now, a year later, it had become routine. The invisible labor that kept their lives upright. Cooking, driving, childcare, paying. I wasn't a mother anymore. I was logistics in human form. I picked up the phone again and stared at the message thread. The words looked harmless in their pastel bubbles, but they cut like glass. I took a screenshot and saved it, then another. I opened my small notebook, the one labeled, "Given, Received." On the next line, under Given, I wrote, "Task assigned without consent." Under Received. I left it blank. The screen of my phone glowed beside the paper. 2 worlds, one digital, one written, both now keeping score. I realized, for the first time, that silence can be a weapon, not against others, but for myself. If they were going to erase me, I'd make sure every erasure left a trace. That evening, the Christmas lights outside flickered against the frost on my window. I sat on the couch, phone in my lap, coffee cold beside me. Another ping. Lyle again. "Mom, don't forget snacks for the kids tonight." I looked at the message, the polite command of it. Then I turned the phone face down and let the room fall quiet again. "They can plan me out of my own time," I whispered, "but I'll plan them out of mine." On the counter, the catering receipt still lay folded, its edges worn from handling. Something about it pulled my eyes, a single line in tiny font near the bottom. Clause 7B, refund valid before 72 hours. I smiled faintly. Sometimes, the smallest print held the biggest exits. The afternoon sun crept through the blinds in narrow golden lines, striping my desk and the piles of paper that had quietly multiplied over the years. I sat down, glasses perched on my nose, and opened my laptop. The catering invoice still sat in my inbox like an unpaid debt to myself. I scrolled through the columns, entree selections, delivery fee, service tax, until I reached the gray-shaded section at the bottom, terms and conditions. The text was small, almost defiant in its size, as if it wanted to be ignored, but I leaned closer. The pen in my hand hovered like a compass over a map, searching for a way out. And there it was. Clause 7B, refund valid up to 60% if canceled at least 72 hours before service. I exhaled long and steady, tracing each word with the pen tip. I did the math. The event date, December 24th, today was the 19th, still within the window. My pulse ticked with a quiet rhythm of precision, like counting stitches in a hem I was mending. I underlined the clause once in yellow, then again in red. Double proof. Just in case anyone tried to say they hadn't seen it, I printed the page and slid it to the front of my given received ledger, clipping it neatly. For the first time all week, I felt the weight of the family's plans start to shift, not on my shoulders, but off them. I called the number listed on the invoice, North Star Catering, Plano. After 2 rings, a young woman's voice answered. "Good afternoon, this is Crystal. How can I help you today?" "Hi, Crystal," I said evenly. "I'd like to confirm a clause on my event contract, specifically refund policy, 7B. Could you send that to me in writing?" "Of course," she said, cheerful but cautious. "Can I get your email address?" Minutes later, the confirmation arrived in my inbox, time-stamped, signed. With the full clause quoted, I replied, asking for the billing profile and payment record associated with the booking. Crystal typed back within minutes. Name, Hele Rowan. Card ending, 44T1. Payment confirmed November 30th, 2024. Every line matched my own records. I wrote back, asking for a projected refund amount if canceled before Deck 21. Her response was quick and clean. Estimated refund, $1,040. Processing time, 5 to 7 business days. I printed the email thread and stapled it neatly behind the clause. Paper behind paper, proof layered like armor. The air in the house felt different then, not warm, but aligned. I wasn't just undoing a charge, I was reclaiming authorship. Still wearing my glasses, I reached for another folder, the one marked Foundations. Years ago, when Lyle and Carol bought their home, I'd been the guarantor on their first mortgage. They never mentioned it again, but I remembered every signature, every risk I'd taken to make sure they could start. I dialed the mortgage servicer's customer service line, endured the hold music, then finally heard a calm voice. This is Brianna from Wells Point Mortgage. How can I assist you today? Hi, I said. I'm looking for archived loan documents from the Mercer file, circa 2012, specifically guarantor information. There was a pause, a series of clicks. Then her voice returned, softer. Yes, I see that here. You're listed as financial guarantor, Hele Rowan. Would you like a copy of the original letter? Yes, please, I said, almost whispering. A few minutes later, the PDF landed in my inbox. I printed it slowly, watching the words form on paper like a ghost materializing. Guarantor, Hele Rowan. I slid the document into the Foundations folder and closed it gently. I didn't plan to use it against anyone. I just wanted to remember that every bright Christmas morning had been built on quiet sacrifices like this, mine. By evening, the house had settled into its usual stillness. I sat at the kitchen table with my ledger open and started adding up the month's totals: groceries, decorations, deposits, gas money for the holiday errands. The numbers rose like temperature readings, each one a degree of generosity gone unnoticed, under-received. I left another blank line, not out of bitterness, but accuracy. I placed the pen down and felt my shoulders ease. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the beginning of it. Finally. I laid the two papers side by side, Clause 7B's on top, the guarantor letter beneath. Two truths staring back at me. One said I was allowed to withdraw, the other reminded me what I'd already given. I clipped them together, slid them into the ledger, and set my alarm for the morning of December 21. Sometimes, power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from filing the right papers in the right order. On Friday afternoon, I carried gifts to Lyle's house and watched a camera sweep past the tree while my tags never made the frame. By the time I stepped back onto the porch, the live stream had already crowned someone else the hero of Christmas. The drive to Lyle's house took 20 minutes, but I rehearsed the same sentence the whole way. Just show up. Don't speak up. The back seat was stacked with neatly wrapped gifts, each one in gold paper and labeled in my best handwriting. I'd even tied ribbons with silver thread, something cheerful, something safe. Maybe, I told myself, the silence of the past week could end quietly, without needing to be explained. The neighborhood shimmered in the pale winter sun. Inflatable reindeer bobbed in front yards. Kids dragged sleds across trimmed lawns that had never seen snow. I parked in front of their house, smoothing my coat as though that might smooth the air between us. The front door swung open before I could knock. Carol's voice floated out, light and rehearsed. Perfect timing, yes, Mom. We're filming the charity live stream. Inside, the living room had transformed into a small studio. A ring light glared against the ornaments. A tripod stood where the armchair used to be. Behind the tree hung a vinyl banner, Merry Mercer Christmas. Just put the gifts near the tree, Carol said, adjusting a microphone clipped to her collar. We're almost ready to go live. I nodded and set my packages down carefully, aligning the tags so they faced forward. My name wasn't on any of the others. That didn't bother me, at least. Not yet. The air smelled of cinnamon candles and artificial snow spray. Somewhere in the kitchen. I heard laughter, the kind that swells right before a camera goes on. The live stream began with a jingle and applause from behind the lens. Welcome to the Mercer family's annual gift drive, Kareel announced brightly, her tone smooth as a commercial. The kids waved behind her, all matching sweaters and polished smiles. I stepped back, out of frame, trying to stay unobtrusive. Then I saw it. Carol knelt near the tree, still talking to the camera, and began quietly rearranging the gifts. The ones wrapped in gold, mine, were lifted out of view, replaced with packages in branded red and white paper. The camera panned across the pile, capturing everything but my work. "Where should mine go?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Oh," she said without turning. "We already prepped the sponsored ones. We'll add yours later." Later never came. I smiled for the camera anyway, a reflex more than a choice. Inside, something small and steady cracked, like a thread pulled too tight. When the live stream ended, applause filled the room again. I picked up my purse, unnoticed in the shuffle. Carol hugged someone's shoulder, thanking them for making this possible. My name wasn't mentioned that night at home. I opened Facebook. A new post gleamed at the top of my feed, our annual family gift drive. There it was, the same backdrop, the same smiles. In the caption, Kirill thanked her parents for sponsoring so much of this year's giving. In one photo, I could see my gold wrapping paper stacked neatly in the corner, my bows, my handwriting, everything I'd touched, cropped, uncredited. I stared at the post until the screen blurred. It wasn't the cruelty that stung, it was the invisibility. I closed my laptop, no music, no lights, just the soft mechanical tick of the clock in the hallway. At my desk, the contract papers still waited in their folder. Clause 7B. I opened my email, typed a new message. Subject, event cancellation order. M2137 Body, Dear North Star Catering. Please process cancellation of the December 24th event per Clause 7B. Thank you. Hella Rowan, I hit send. The small whoosh of the email leaving my outbox felt louder than anything all day. Then I opened the ledger. Deck 21. Tags removed, gifts erased, catering canceled. Paper trail started. I closed the book and turned off the lamp. The house darkened, calm and complete. Some absences aren't mistakes. They're boundaries finally enforced. The next morning, a new voicemail blinked on my phone. Carol's voice, sugar-sweet but sharp at the edges. "Hey, Mom, we just found out you canceled the catering. Is that some kind of joke?" The morning began like any other. The gurgle of the coffee maker, the hum of the heater, and the faint sound of the radio announcer talking about a cold front rolling through North Texas. I cracked the blinds just enough to see the frost clinging to the mailbox. It was a Sunday that wanted to be peaceful. Then my phone blinked. One missed call, one voicemail. For a second, I thought it was the pharmacy, or maybe another holiday reminder from the church, but the name on the screen stopped me mid-sip, Carol Mercer. I stared at it long enough for the phone to dim, then pressed play. "Hey, Mom," her voice started, sugar melting over something sharp. "We just found out you canceled the catering. Is that some kind of joke?" A pause. Then her tone hardened. "People are counting on you. Do you realize how bad this makes us look?" The message ended with a faint background laugh, like she'd already moved on to her next conversation. I replayed it once, then again. The little red voicemail icon blinked like an alarm that wouldn't shut off. For a long time, I didn't move. The coffee cooled beside me. The scent of it turned bitter, the way things do when left too long unattended. Finally, I opened my phone's messages. My thumbs hovered, then typed what needed no decoration. It wasn't a joke. The order was in my name. I chose to cancel. A minute passed, then another. Her reply came, quick and clipped. "You should have talked to Lyle first. Now we're stuck." Then, "You always make things harder. We trusted you." I stared at those words. We trusted you. No, I thought, you used me. There's a difference. I set the phone face down on the counter and took a deep breath. The house hummed with silence, so still it almost felt holy. Not long after, it buzzed again. This time, it was Lyle. "Mom," he began, his voice thick. "Couldn't you have waited? People are talking. Talking, I repeated. You mean blaming? He hesitated. Carol said you didn't tell anyone. You know how this looks. I know exactly how it looks, I said softly. Like I stopped paying for something that was never mine to fund. He went quiet. The silence between us stretched so long, I could hear the faint static of his breathing. It reminded me of when he was 8 years old, caught with his hand in the cookie jar, trying to think of an excuse that would sound like honesty. He hung up first. The screen went black, but the ache behind my ribs stayed. Not grief this time, just a dull, almost clinical understanding. By noon, I turned on my printer. The hum filled the kitchen as I printed the call log, screenshots of the messages, and a transcription of the voicemail. The pages slid out warm into my hands. I punched 3 holes into each and filed them neatly into my given, received ledger. If they want to rewrite the story, I murmured, sliding the folder shut. I'll keep the script. The rest of the day passed quietly. I folded laundry, watered the poinsettias, wiped the counters clean. Normal motions that anchored me to something steadier than their noise. When the light began to fade, I sat back at the table, phone in hand. The red voicemail icon still blinked at me, patient and persistent. I played it one last time. They wanted me to feed them, I whispered, but not to stand my ground. Then I deleted it with a single tap. The phone screen went dark. The kitchen fell silent again, but this time, the silence belonged to me. Message received. By evening, a new notification blinked. This one from a name I hadn't seen in months. Nadine. Hell, come to the ranch this Christmas. Let them handle their own chaos for once. The fire had burned low, throwing soft amber light across the quiet living room. I sat in my chair, one slipper half dangling, the air thick with the faint scent of pine and cooling coffee. A stack of unopened mail sat on the side table. Bills, flyers, a white envelope peeking from the bottom. I didn't have the heart to deal with any of it tonight. The phone buzzed against the wood. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out, but something in me, maybe the same restless part that couldn't sleep, made me answer. Hello? A bright laugh burst through the receiver. Well, I'll be darned. Hella Rowan, still alive and kicking. Nadine? My voice cracked between shock and a grin I hadn't used in months. The one and only, she said. I was just talking about you to my horses. They don't listen either, so I figured I'd call someone who might. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Thanksgiving. It felt strange and light, like remembering how to ride a bike after decades. We talked about old times, long nights at the accounting firm, cold takeout, office gossip. Her voice was warm and effortless, like the way Texas sun used to spill through my old office blinds. Finally, she said. Listen, come spend Christmas here. The ranch has a guest house, the wine's stocked, and no one's going to hand you a diaper or a to-do list. I nearly dropped the phone. You're serious? As heart trouble, she replied. Just bring yourself. Maybe that famous pecan pie recipe. Or don't. You've done enough feeding for one lifetime. Something in me cracked, not from sadness, but release. Nadine, I think I might just take you up on that. Good, I'll leave the porch light on. After she hung up, I sat staring at the phone in my hand, smiling without realizing it. The quiet of the room no longer felt empty. It felt waiting. Then my eyes drifted to the mail pile again. The white envelope. My name in Lyle's handwriting, a little hurried. The kind he used when guilt trailed the pen. I picked it up, traced the edges. My first instinct was to open it, fix, respond, explain. But that instinct had cost me too much peace already. Instead, I set it down and whispered, "Not tonight." I leaned back, letting the fire's warmth sink into me. For a moment, I drifted back years ago, late shift at the firm. Nadine and I side by side, coffee gone cold, laughing about someday. She'd said, "You and I, hell, will retire somewhere warm, where no one calls us unless it's for good news." And here she was, calling me into that promise. I opened my laptop, booked a small motel halfway to Santa Fe, the safe kind of commitment, just in case I changed my mind. I printed the confirmation, slid it into my ledger under a fresh line. Deck 22, accepted invitation, pending departure. I turned off the printer and looked around my house. The couch still held the same shallow dent where I'd sat during every family gathering, watching through a screen what I'd once helped build. The calendar on the wall was still open to December. I circled the 23rd and smiled softly. "Time to step out of the frame," I murmured. Outside. The wind rattled the branches, like applause too far to hear. Tomorrow, I'd pack. Not the big suitcase for family holidays, just the small blue one that fit under a motel bed. And beside the unopened envelope, I'd leave a note. Do not wait for me, or the gifts, or the food I paid for. Dawn slid across the kitchen like a thin sheet of milk, pale and quiet. I folded the note I'd written the night before and set it beside the unopened white envelope and the little ceramic dish that held my spare keys. The paper felt warm from my fingers, warmer than the words on it. Don't wait for me and or the gifts, or the food I paid for. I rested my palm on it a moment longer, as if pressing the sentence into the grain of the table. The tree in the corner clicked on with its timer, tiny bulbs blinking to life against the window's faint reflection. For years I'd loved that first glow. Today it felt like a polite bow goodbye. Coat, scarf, gloves. The small blue suitcase rolled behind me, whispering over the tile. I took one last look around, the mug waiting by the coffee maker, the calendar circled in red, the couch with its familiar indent, and turned the deadbolt gently so it wouldn't echo. Some doors you close for sound, others you close for meaning. Outside. The cold made the steps ring. My suitcase wheels tapped the seams in the concrete like a metronome. The driveway yawned empty. Lyle's SUV was already gone. Rehearsal dinner prep. I'd heard them call it, though there was no dinner, just cameras and a schedule to match. My car started on the second try, coughing once in protest, then settling into a dependable rumble. Good enough to get me far enough, I told it, patting the cracked dashboard the way I used to pat a toddler's back. I did not look back at the house when I pulled away. Looking back is a polite way of asking permission. Parker Road unfurled, then the on-ramp, then the broad westbound lanes that always make Texas feel bigger than the map. The sky was the color of a soft tin pot, the sun tucked behind it. I tuned the radio until I found an oldies station and hummed along to a song my husband used to butcher on purpose, just to make me laugh. I could almost hear his voice missing the same note, the way he'd grin like he'd done it for art. Memories followed me at a safe distance. The summer trip to Palo Duro, the winter we got lost near Amarillo and swore the wind was herding us like cattle. We'd found our way by reading the water tower names like breadcrumbs. Back then, I'd driven for our family. Now, I drove for myself. The difference is not a wound, it's a seam. The miles loosened the knot between my shoulders. Mesquite trees thinned. Billboards grew rare. A hawk traced lazy circles over a field where a single tractor slept. I thought about the ledger waiting in my bag. The line from last night. Accepted invitation. Pending departure. I smiled at the past tense sneaking up on me. I had departed. I had crossed the smallest vastness, the front step, and everything after that was only distance. Near Wichita Falls, I pulled into a roadside station with a sagging awning and a faded Santa taped to the glass. The pump clicked stubbornly. The screen blinked insert card again. Inside. The cashier wore a Santa hat with tired dignity. 2 aisles over, a young mother juggled a stroller, a toddler tugging her sleeve, and a carton of milk that kept slipping from her basket. She caught me watching and offered a thin laugh. "They're all I've got," she said, then added quickly, "which is plenty," like she was afraid the walls would judge her. I lifted the milk into her basket as if it weighed nothing. "Then take care of yourself, too," I said. "That's part of taking care of them." For a heartbeat, she looked like she might cry. Then she swallowed it down. I paid for a coffee and, when the cashier turned, slipped another to the young mother's pile. "Holiday coupon," I said, tapping the counter as if that were a real thing. She nodded, relief and pride wrestling to a draw. Back in the car, the coffee steamed into the cold air. I took the first sip and let it sit on my tongue, bitter and honest. On the highway again. The landscape widened into a kind of sentence with no comma, the trailing edge of Texas pulling me toward the border. Somewhere between miles, I let the radio go silent and listened to the little noises a car makes when it remembers it's old, the hum in third, the slight whistle at the driver's window. It felt like companionship, not failure. By late afternoon, I checked into a roadside inn where the clerk wore a sweater with snowmen marching across it. He slid a clipboard toward me. "Traveling for the holidays?" he asked, the way clerks do when they can see the answer and want you to say it anyway. "Yes," I said, and left it at that. "Merry Christmas, ma'am." "It will be," I answered, surprising myself with how sure it sounded. The room was clean in the way of places that hold every kind of story. A small table under a lamp, a bedspread patterned like ice crystals, a heater that popped once, then settled into a low purr. I set my suitcase by the door and opened the curtains. Flurries lifted and sank beneath the parking lot lights, undecided about becoming snow. I took out the ledger and wrote, "Deck 23, left home, no guilt, no anger, just distance." The pen pressed a small groove into the paper, as if the page wanted to remember the weight of it. I turned on the shower and let the water drum the travel dust from my shoulders. In the fogged mirror afterward, my face looked like my mother's had at the same age, weary around the eyes. Yes, but awake. "You finally left," I told the woman in the glass. She tilted her chin back at me. "I smiled first," she answered. "On the bed." I scrolled through my phone because habit is a stubborn animal. A new text from Lyle glowed on the screen. "Mom, where are you? We can't do this without you." The old reflex rose. Explain, soften, offer. I let it pass. I stood and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. The road beyond the parking lot lay empty, a thin line of possibility running from one edge of the night to the other. I took a photo of it, just the quiet lane and the drifting flurries, and sent it back without a word. No dots appeared. No reply came. The silence did not bruise. I switched off the lamp and lay back, listening to the heater purr, to a door shut somewhere down the hall, to a child on the floor above giggling at a cartoon. The world kept going without my permission. That felt right. In the dark, I pictured Nadine's porch, light throwing a circle onto the hard New Mexico ground, the way moths write their secret alphabets through the glow. I pictured myself stepping into that circle, carrying nothing anyone could demand. I closed my eyes. The room held me like a small, sturdy boat. Tomorrow, I would cross the line on the map. Tonight I had already crossed the one inside the house I left behind. Winter light lay thin across the motel's stiff curtains, a chalk smear that turned the room the color of unpolished bone. The heater clicked, paused, clicked again. My suitcase waited by the door like a polite dog, and the TV rolled a silent weather loop of arrows and warnings I refused to absorb. The phone, face down on the nightstand, trembled itself across the wood. It stopped, trembled again, stopped, then lit the room with a cold square of blue. Carol Voss, the screen said. It went dark, then brightened with Lyle Mercer, then Kirill again. I let the first two pass, listening to the small drum of my heartbeat, the whistle along the driver's window that still rang in my ears from the highway. If I picked up, I told myself, I would speak plain, no apologies. Nothing bartered, just air, shaped into sentences, and then, done. I answered on Lyle's third try. "Mom?" he said, voice stretched tight, like a chord someone was testing for fray. "Where are you?" "In a quiet place," I said. "Don't wait for me or the gifts or the catering I paid for." He inhaled sharply. "You can't do this to family." "I did it for myself," I said, even not loud. "Merry Christmas." "Lyle?" I pressed end and set the phone down. I didn't tremble. The stillness that followed felt like a porch after rain. No thunder left, just the smell of clean. The phone jittered on the wood again. I didn't answer. I stood and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. Outside, the parking lot glowed sodium orange, empty but for a pickup with a wreath hanging crooked from its grill. Somewhere a door shut. A man laughed. A child begged a vending machine to be generous. I let the curtain fall and sat on the edge of the bed, counting my breaths the way the nurses taught me after my husband died. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. The room settled around me like a coat I had finally decided fit. News arrived sideways. A neighbor's daughter posted a story from 2 blocks over. Cars lining the curb in front of Lyle's house. Kids in sweaters pulling at their collars. A box of plastic cutlery on the counter beside paper plates already bending under the weight of Costco pie. Someone's caption, "Festive chaos." Another voice, barely there behind the music. "I thought there was catering." The camera moved too quickly, avoiding the table where the roast should have been, skimming past an unplugged slow cooker like a guilty glance. Secondhand humiliation has a taste. It's metallic, like biting your tongue by accident. But the ache under it wasn't triumph, it was clarity. I had been the padding in the machine for so long that no one noticed until the gears scraped. It wasn't that I had stopped loving them. I had stopped cushioning the consequences. Carol tried to salvage optics. A push notification popped up. "Merry Mercer Christmas. Live." I tapped it. The camera wobbled, caught the tree, the lights, the pile of packages arranged for show. A child's voice, Lacey, by the pitch, cut clean through the cheer. "Where's Grandma?" She sounded more curious than wounded, and somehow that made it land harder. Comments bubbled. "Oh, Grandma. Is she okay? Bring her in." The camera dove toward the floor as if the room had tipped. The stream ended mid-syllable. I replayed it once to be sure I hadn't imagined the question, then again just to honor it. The heater clicked back on with a hollow thunk. I poured tap water into a paper cup and watched the second hand on my watch make one full trip. Noise had never made them hear me. Silence finally did. I slid my ledger from the suitcase, its cardboard cover softened at the edges by use. Under received, where I had left so many spaces empty. I wrote 3 words like I was planting bulbs. Space. Time. Breath. The group chat began to ping, names stacked like dominoes. We're handling it. Mom, please reconsider. People are asking about you. A ballooned heart floated beside one message, tone deaf as confetti at a funeral. I read each line and let it drift past, the way I used to watch my husband's fishing line carry downstream, trusting the current to do what it does. I didn't reply. I turned off read receipts months ago, a small boundary that had felt petty then and sacred now. I slid the phone into the nightstand drawer and closed it gently. The wood, a soft, decisive sound. The TV's weather loop caught my eye again. Blue arrows, gray clouds, warning of a cold front sweeping down the plains. It seemed appropriate. Cold fronts don't ask permission either. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. A patch of shadow near the sprinkler head looked like a lowercase letter. I decided it was an I. Not for invisible. The word I used to whisper to myself when family photos posted without my face. Tonight, it stood for intact. I had not shattered. I had simply removed myself from a room where my presence had been counted but not seen. The phone, muffled by the drawer, burst again. One long vibration. Then another. I let it sing to itself, thinking of the table at Lyle's house, the parade of paper plates marching toward a future where maybe someone would learn how to plan, or at least how to ask. I pictured the scene not with glee, but with distance. Like watching a play from the last row, you can love the actors and still recognize the script is broken. I stood and opened the curtain one more time. The lot lay quieter now, the wreath on the pickup stirring in a shy wind. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the sting clear my head. I remembered my husband botching that same Christmas song, remembered Lyle at 8 with a cowlick that defied reason, remembered a version of myself who thought giving was a kind of immortality. Maybe it is, but it can also be a way to disappear. I closed the curtain and turned toward the small desk. The motel pen was half dried. I coaxed it across the page until ink came steady. Under given, I wrote, catering order placed, gifts wrapped and tagged, time offered without consent. Under received. I didn't write forgiveness. I wrote quiet that belongs to me. The drawer hummed again with another text, then stilled. I left it alone. The heater coughed and settled. Across the hall. Someone dropped a key card. It skittered like a startled bug. I switched off the lamp and let the room return to its soft, useful dark. I did not gloat. I did not rehearse speeches I would never need to give. I thought of Nadine's porch light in New Mexico, of the way moths always find a circle to dance inside, of how some circles are prisons and others are invitations. Tomorrow I would drive toward the one that asked nothing but my name. I folded the corner of the ledger page, a small dog ear to mark the night the story changed tense. Not I will, not I should, but I did. Then I slept. And the sleep was plain and entire. The sort you get when you lay down what isn't yours to carry. The sky was still indigo when I turned off the highway and rolled through the sleeping streets of Plano. Christmas morning. Porch lights blinked, half-heartedly. Timers doing their duty long after the excitement had gone. Wreaths sagged under dew. In one yard, an inflatable reindeer leaned sideways, deflated but still smiling. The town looked like it had exhaled. When I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor light flicked on, startled to see me. The wreath on my own door hung crooked. One bulb burned out. The air smelled faintly of pine and something older, like dust remembering laughter. I turned the key, and the lock gave way without resistance. Inside, the quiet was thick. A coffee mug waited on the counter, half full, its ring staining the marble. Cabinets gaped open as if mid-sentence. A torn grocery list hung from the fridge by a single magnet, ice plates, whipped cream. Next to it, a crumpled receipt read, "Urgent catering order, 12:23. Their haste lingered in every corner, and yet it didn't sting. It felt like walking into a house I used to rent, a place that held my shape but no longer owned it. I set my purse down, then my keys, and finally the ledger. Its spine made a small, honest sound against the table. I opened to the last entry. Deck 23, left home. No guilt, no anger. Just distance. The heater hummed alive. I poured myself water, sipped, and watched the sunrise through the thin drapes. It was my kitchen again, my silence, my rhythm. At 9 a.m., the knock came, sharp, insistent, like someone trying to wake a locked door. I let it sound twice more before I answered. Lyle stood there, hair uncombed, coat unbuttoned. Behind him, Carol hovered with two of the kids, their Christmas pajamas peeking out from under jackets. The little one, Lassie, held a stuffed penguin by the wing. None of them looked rested. "Mom, Lyle began, then stopped. His eyes landed on the table. The ledger lay open. The first page bore photocopies of receipts, text transcripts, the catering invoice stamped canceled. Next to them sat a neatly written note in my hand. For every time I was erased, I wrote it down. For every word I couldn't say. I saved proof. Carol stepped forward, voice soft, brittle. "We didn't mean intentions," I said, turning the ledger toward them. "Don't change what's written." The red ink dates stared up like tiny witnesses. December 17th, overheard conversation. December 18th, holiday card omission. December 19th, babysitting assignment. December 21st, tags removed. December 22nd, voicemail saved. December 23rd, departure. Each one marked, cataloged, printed, stapled. Their faces shifted through disbelief, guilt, and something smaller, recognition. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The paper spoke fluently. Lyle's lips parted, then closed again. His shoulders folded inward, the way they used to when I caught him lying about broken toys. Carol's mascara smudged at the corners. She wiped it with the back of her hand, a gesture too human for defense. "We were overwhelmed," she whispered. "Everything, just—" "I know," I said. "That's why I stopped helping." She blinked, as if expecting anger and finding none confused her more. Lyle looked at the pages again. "Mom, you didn't have to keep score." "It wasn't a score," I said gently. "It was survival." He nodded once, a small, defeated motion, the kind you make when you realize the argument you prepared won't work here. Carol reached for his sleeve. "Let's go," she murmured. They turned, kids in tow, closing the door behind them with a careful click. The silence that followed was different from the night before, cleaner. I sat down and let the quiet settle, tracing the ridge of the ledger with my thumb. On the table, the morning light pooled around the open pages, making the ink shimmer like something newly alive. After a while, I added one more line at the bottom of the last page. Deck 25, peace achieved through truth. Then I closed the book. The act wasn't dramatic. It was small, deliberate, final. I reached for a single candle from the cupboard, the one my husband used to light before every Christmas meal, whispering the same words each year. "Let what's left be enough." I struck a match, let the flame steady itself, and repeated his line quietly into the room. "Let what's left be enough." The house didn't answer. It didn't need to. Later. I sat by the window as sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted the wall in thin gold lines. My phone buzzed once. Nadine's name appeared. "You coming out to New Mexico?" Her voice would soon ask. And this time, I already knew my answer. Nadine's voice poured through the phone like sunlight through half-closed blinds. "Come spend New Year's with us. Hella, the guest room's made up. You need air that doesn't smell like regret." I let her words hang between us. For months, every decision had felt heavy, like dragging a chain across a kitchen floor. This one felt weightless. "I'll pack tonight," I said. My own voice startled me with how sure it sounded. When the call ended, I looked at the ledger on my table. For the first time since it existed, I didn't open it. I ran my hand across the cover and left it shut. No new entry needed. The story, for now, could rest. I moved slowly, careful but unhurried, folding sweaters and tucking in my husband's old thermos, the one he'd used on camping trips when coffee meant survival. Beside it, I placed a small cactus plant I'd kept on the windowsill since he died. It had survived everything: Texas heat, neglect, time. Maybe I could too. By noon, the trunk was packed. One suitcase, the cactus, the thermos, the ledger. When I closed it, the latch clicked like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. My neighbor, Mr. Ellis, shuffled over in his robe, holding his newspaper like a shield. "Long trip?" he asked. "Long overdue," I said. He chuckled softly. "Good for you, hell." I smiled, started the engine, and felt the familiar hum under my palms. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward obligation. I was driving toward open space. The sun climbed higher as I headed west, spilling gold over flat plains. Radio stations faded in and out. Country songs, weather, updates, a preacher talking about forgiveness. I left them all behind and listened to the hum of the tires instead. Mile after mile of open road stretched ahead, the horizon endless, forgiving. The last time I'd taken this route, I was 25, newly married, and terrified of the future. We'd eloped to Santa Fe, laughing at our own boldness. He'd driven the whole way, one hand on the wheel, one resting over mine. Now it was just me. But the silence didn't hurt. It felt earned. The sky widened with every hour. Even grief felt smaller under that much blue. At a roadside cafe near Tucumcari, I stopped for gas and pie. The place smelled of burnt coffee and nostalgia. Inside, a woman about my age sat at the counter, hair silver as dust, smile easy. She caught my eye. "You've got that look," she said. "Someone who finally put down a heavy bag." I laughed. "Took me 40 years. She nodded, stirring her coffee. "We all carry too long. Then one morning, you wake up and realize your arms are free." Her name was Jean. We talked about children, hers in Oregon, mine back in Texas, about how love doesn't end. It just changes shape until it fits the space left over. She paid for my coffee when I wasn't looking. When I thanked her, she said, "Consider it a toll paid forward." The sky outside had turned the color of tarnished silver when I got back on the highway. I drove until the flatlands broke into low red mesas, their edges glowing under the late sun. Somewhere between Amarillo and Santa Rosa. My phone buzzed. A text from Lyle. "Mom, we'll come by after the new year. No excuses, no apologies, just a thin bridge of words." I didn't reply, but I smiled. It was enough that he'd written. The "Welcome to New Mexico" sign rose out of the desert like a small miracle. I pulled over, stepped out into the wind, and took a photo with the border behind me. My hair whipped across my face, my cheeks stung with cold, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I laughed out loud, unpretty, unfiltered, real. Sometimes you have to leave home to show people what it costs when you're gone. By the time the sky deepened to violet, Santa Fe was close enough to smell wood smoke on the air. I turned onto Nadine's long dirt drive just as the first porch light flicked on. She stood on the steps, arms folded, grinning like someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. "You made it," she said as I stepped out of the car. "I almost didn't," I replied, laughing through tears. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and sage. Inside, the kitchen glowed with warmth, pots clattering, a radio humming something slow. And for the first time in years, I wasn't passing through someone else's story. I was arriving in my own. The first night at Nadine's ranch smelled of pine smoke and bread. The hills outside Santa Fe were hushed under a lavender sky, and the kitchen lights spilled like honey across the porch. Nadine waved me toward the end chair at her long farmhouse table. "This one's yours," she said simply. I hesitated, waiting for the usual script. Could you carve the ham? Could you keep an eye on the kids? But none came. I sat. My hands rested in my lap, useless in the best way. Conversation drifted around me, gentle and unhurried. For once, I wasn't the one holding the seams together. When the laughter came, it didn't clang, it floated. I realized how foreign this sound was when it wasn't built on exhaustion. Neighbors wandered in with casseroles and pie, their greetings easy. Someone asked, "You drove all the way from Texas. What music did you play?" Another, "You ever read Willa Cather? You'd like her." Small questions, real questions. I answered them without scanning for judgment. No one mentioned babysitting or dinner budgets or family obligations. Just people eating together. No debts tallied. My shoulders dropped another inch. That night, I slept with the window cracked open. Coyotes sang somewhere far off, their voices rising and falling like a language older than guilt. At dawn, frost dusted the sagebrush silver. I walked a narrow path behind the barn, boots crunching softly in the dirt. The horizon looked infinite. My breath came easy. I mistook usefulness for love. I whispered to the desert. It was never a fair trade. A crow lifted from a fence post, black wings slicing the sky. I bent down and picked up a smooth stone, small enough to fit in my palm. I didn't know why I kept it. Only that it felt right. Something simple that asked for nothing back. Later that afternoon, I sat at Nadine's kitchen table with my ledger. The edges were worn now, pages thick with the weight of everything I'd once needed to prove. Under given, the list went on for pages. Money, meals, hours, silence. Under received, I wrote, slowly and deliberately, time, room, respect, myself. Then, in smaller handwriting beneath the date, Deck 29, 9:32 p.m. My piece. I tied the ledger shut with a strand of twine. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was evidence that I had existed and that I had stopped apologizing for it. The next morning, as sunlight poured over the red mesas, my phone buzzed. A text from my younger son, Dylan, in Portland. "Mom, fly up for New Year's? No plans? Just you and me? Say yes?" I read it twice, then typed back, "Yes, 2 nights. No caretaking, just company." His reply came seconds later. "Only company." The word only landed like grace. That evening, before bed, I wrote one more note, not in the ledger but on plain stationery. Lyle. It began. "I love you. I will not be used. When you're ready to meet me as your mother, not your solution, I'm here." I didn't send it. I tucked it under the ledger's ribbon, a quiet promise between the woman I was and the woman I'd become. New Year's Eve found me on Nadine's porch swing, wrapped in a quilt. The sky was a spill of stars, brighter than I remembered. Coyotes called again in the distance. Nadine came out with 2 mugs of warm cider. We clinked them together. "They learned what breaks when I'm gone," I said softly. "And you?" she asked. "I learned what holds when I'm alone." A gentle wind brushed across the porch. I reached into my pocket and took out the small stone, setting it on the windowsill beside me. A small monument to staying with myself. I didn't need to add it to the ledger. It was already written somewhere better, in quiet, in breath, in peace. You know, at 65. I finally learned something simple that took me a lifetime to understand. Love without respect is just labor disguised as devotion. For years, I kept thinking that if I gave enough, they'd see my worth. But peace doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being valued. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, remember this: stepping back isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them. I didn't walk away to punish anyone. I walked away to find myself again. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a boundary that others didn't understand at first? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Maybe Texas, maybe Ohio, maybe right here in New Mexico. And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next one. Let's keep building this little circle of stories. For every woman who ever gave too much and finally learned how to give to herself.